Every once in a while, we ask the question, who is winning the war in Ukraine? And victory is measured in many ways, not just in terms of territory, but also the political goals that each side strikes. Tonight, we want to tell you about Russia's wins. Russia has one more buyer of oil, and that buyer is Japan. And this is a very, very significant turn, a big win for Russia, a big blow to the West, and vindication of sorts for India. Although it doesn't really help India, we'll tell you why in just a bit. But first, let's understand why this is such a big deal. You see, Japan is a close ally of the US. Japan joined the West in sanctioning Russia. And now the same Japan has decided to buy Russian oil. How can they do that? If Japan had sanctioned Russia, how can it buy Russian oil? Because it kept oil and gas out of the sanctions, just like Europe did. Japan stopped short of sanctioning Russian oil and gas, and now it wants to buy cheaper Russian oil. This is a setback to America's plans of containing Russia. And to add insult to injury, Japan is buying Russian oil above the Western price cap. We'll tell you about it. This move demonstrates what the world has always known, that Western sanctions regime is hollow. Quick question. Why does Japan need Russian oil? Because it's cheap and it's available. It ensures Japan's energy security. Japan needs oil, but it does not produce any fossil fuel. 90% of what Japan consumes is imported, so energy imports are crucial for Tokyo, and you cannot depend on just one source. So Japan is turning to Russia for oil. It is pursuing an independent policy. Now here's the interesting part. Japan is part of the G7, the group of seven, the world's 7 largest economies. And this group, the G7, wanted to cap Russian oil prices. They wanted to set a limit to Russian oil prices. The G7, the European Union, and Australia were all part of this effort. They wanted to fix Russian oil prices at $60 a barrel, so that Russia is not able to sell oil at high prices. The idea was to limit its earnings from oil. $60 a barrel, that was it. But Japan did not join this effort. It sought an exemption, and it got one. With this, Japan was able to buy more Russian energy. Now look at the numbers. In the first 60 days of this year, Japan bought close to 750,000 barrels of Russian oil. How much did Tokyo pay for this? About $52 million. That comes to under $70 per barrel, but that's more than the Western price cap of $60 per barrel. And this is not a one-off case. Japan has no plans to stop buying Russian oil. But it has made some changes to its policy vis-a-vis Russia. Earlier, Russia enjoyed a special status. Russia was among the most favored nations for trade. Well, this is a tag that is given to countries that enjoy favorable trade terms. Most favored nation, that's what they're called. Russia had that status in Japan. But after the war in Ukraine, this tag was taken away. And last week, Japan decided to not restore it, at least for one more year. So tariffs on Russian goods will continue, but none of this will impact Russian energy supplies. They won't face any tariffs, the oil supplies. So much for isolating Russia. Europe has been doing the same. Since last year, it has imported goods worth $186 billion. These are among the top allies of Ukraine. And then we have Pakistan, also an ally of Ukraine. Pakistan is supplying ammunition to Ukraine, and now Pakistan is also buying Russian oil. Reports say Pakistan will order Russian crude oil next month. We don't know how it will pay for it, but this is from Pakistan's finance minister. He said the first order will be placed in the month of May, and 4 weeks after that, the deliveries will be made. Reports say Moscow has promised a discount to Islamabad. So clearly, Western sanctions are not working. But more buyers for Moscow is not great news for India. You see, when the demand increases, the cost advantage may go. And prices are already rising. In the month of March, the price of Russian crude shot up because of increased demand. And today, oil prices went up again. That's because of a surprise decision by OPEC+. This is a cartel of oil producers, OPEC+. It's the largest energy cartel in the world. And they've decided to reduce oil output. They will cut exports by 1 million barrels a day. And Russia is part of this group, OPEC+. And Russia too will cut production. How does it help them? It's simple economics. The demand is high. They will cut supply, so the prices will go up. Indian importers are gearing up for this. Reports say India is ready to pay more for Russian crude, and China too wants to buy more. With zero COVID gone and the economy up and running, China is hungry for oil. And Indian importers will compete with China in the energy market. Today, prices increased by over 5%. One barrel of Brent crude was trading at above $84. The rupee is showing signs of stress. Reports say OPEC supply cuts could weaken the Indian rupee. How will all of this impact India? This is a developing story. Expect more in the coming days. Meanwhile, the downfall of the dollar remains work in progress. The US dollar is facing a backlash. We told you about this last week. We got a lot of positive feedback on that story, so thanks for that. Tonight, we'll bring you the second part of our story. This one is about alliances, about countries joining hands to challenge the US dollar. At the forefront of this is BRICS. That's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. BRICS. These are the biggest emerging economies in the world. BRICS represents 41% of the world's population, 24% of the world's GDP, and more than 16% of the world's trade. Now, Russia thinks that BRICS should do more, so it has floated the idea of a common currency. The first indication came in January. Russia's foreign minister had issued a statement then. I have a copy with me. This is what Sergei Lavrov said. Serious, self-respecting countries are well aware of what is at stake and want to create their own mechanisms to ensure sustainable development. It is in this direction that the initiatives that have been voiced recently about the need to think about creating our own currencies within the framework of BRICS. This was about 3 months ago. The idea is now gathering steam. Reports say they're working on a proposal which is likely to be taken up in August. That's when the BRICS summit will be held in South Africa. Russia has been pushing for this since last year. The Russian president backs the idea. Last year he said, and I'm quoting, "The matter of creating the international reserve currency based on the basket of currencies of our countries is under review." Russia has its own reasons to push for this. It is under Western sanctions. Its access to the global banking system has been limited. It cannot use the US dollar freely, so it is pushing for a new global reserve currency. And the other members of BRICS seem open to the idea. They too want to challenge the dollar's hegemony. How will this happen? A Russian lawmaker shared the way forward. His name is Alexander Babakov. He is the deputy chairman of Russia's State Duma. That's the lower house of the Russian parliament. Here's what Babakov said, and I'm quoting. "The transition to settlements in national currencies is the first step. The next one is to provide the circulation of digital or any other form of a fundamentally new currency in the nearest future." So that is the way forward. And some of this is already happening, like the settlement of trade in national currencies. India has an agreement with Russia. It's called the rupee-ruble trade mechanism. India pays for Russian goods in rupees and Russia earns in rubles. They do this with the help of special Vostro accounts. And this has led to a boost in bilateral trade. Let me show you some numbers. In 2022, India's trade with Russia touched a record. It was valued at $30 billion, 30 billion. This is believed to be an all-time high. Of course, this surge was fueled by oil purchases, but Russia has more expectations from India. It is banking on India for more support, wider support. In fact, President Putin has unveiled his new foreign policy. They've published new guidelines in Moscow, a handbook of sorts, you could say, for Russian diplomats. And what does it say about India? I'm quoting again. "Russia will continue to build up a particularly privileged strategic partnership with the Republic of India with a view to enhance and expand cooperation in all areas on a mutually beneficial basis." And Russia has similar hopes from China. The plan for a BRICS currency cannot materialize without help from India and China. Russia needs support from both of them. And it's not going to be easy. Will China, that wants the yuan to replace the US dollar, agree to a BRICS currency? And would India want economic integration with China, especially given the challenges at the border? These conflicting priorities are the biggest roadblocks before the BRICS today. But that doesn't take away from the fact that they're all ready to dump the dollar. The dollar's dominance is clearly under threat. Meanwhile, here's another geopolitical battleground, the Pacific island nation of Vanuatu, a country made up of about 80 islands. They house around 319,000 people. And this island nation, like others in the region, is caught in a tussle between the US and China. We'll start with the latest development. The US plans to open an embassy in Vanuatu. This was confirmed by the US State Department, and this is another move to counter China, to limit China's growing influence in the Pacific. So far, the US had a representative not in Vanuatu, but in a country nearby, in the island nation of New Guinea. But now the Americans will set up a new embassy dedicated to Vanuatu, and this marks an important shift. It shows that America is serious about holding on to its influence in the region. Historically, Washington viewed the Pacific as its backyard. It has defense agreements with most of these island nations, and these agreements give the Americans exclusive rights. They can navigate through certain parts of the Pacific. Now look at this map closely and you'll understand. You'll see that these islands are closer to Asia and Australia than to the US. So how does the US dominate the region? With the help of military bases. The Americans have a naval base in Guam. What is Guam? For all intents and purposes, Guam is an American colony in the Pacific. It sits on a vantage point. It has a strategic location, and this helps the US extend influence over the Pacific Islands. Also, it brings the Americans within striking distance of China, and China is very aware of that fact. So over the years, China has tried to wean away these islands from the US. It uses money, threats and bribery and everything in between to sway the islands. And China's moves have been working. Case in point, the Solomon Islands. That's another Pacific country. In 2019, it officially established diplomatic relations with China. And by 2022, it had signed a draft security pact with China. Beijing has also been pumping in millions into the island nation. It has been sending companies like Huawei to build telecom infrastructure. That's standard Chinese debt trap diplomacy, and the result is this. Last August, the Solomon Islands did not let an American and British ship dock at their ports. This was a clear sign of shifting allegiances. The US has woken up to the danger. It reopened its embassy in the Solomon Islands earlier this year. This was done after a gap of about 30 years. And this is what the White House had to say about it.
So I'm here to discuss with the president and other members of his team our desire to maintain close relations with the Solomons. We've quietly underscored that there are a few areas that we would have concerns by if, for instance, the Solomons chose to work in a manner that would encourage or support military power projection in the region. We think those steps would be unwelcome, not just to the United States, but for other countries in the Indo-Pacific. So look, we're working closely. We're working closely with all the countries in the Pacific. We recognize the challenges, but we're here to continue dialogue.
Coming back to Vanuatu, a similar game is being played on the island. China and the US are trying to one-up each other. Biden has promised millions to the entire region. This includes Vanuatu and other nations like the Marshall Islands and Micronesia. A key part of the funding is to fight the impacts of climate change. Because Vanuatu, like most Pacific Island nations, is extremely vulnerable to climate change. It recently faced multiple cyclones, and China was quick to open its checkbook.
We express our sincere sympathies to Vanuatu for the recent back-to-back cyclones and other disasters it experienced and the serious financial loss it has endured. Foreign Minister Chin Gang sent a message of sympathies to Foreign Minister Jotham Napat soon after the disaster struck. The Red Cross Society of China has provided $100,000 in emergency humanitarian cash assistance to Vanuatu.
That was from early March. And now Washington is opening an embassy in Vanuatu. It's likely to prevent a Solomon Islands-like situation and to stay a step ahead of Beijing. Whatever happens next, one thing is clear. The Pacific Island nations are now caught up in the US-China rivalry. In the short term, they will get money and courtship from both sides, but in the long term, they may come to miss their old obscurity.